I am back. It is a little while later, and I think I needed a recharge for what's coming next, which is a pair of questions which actually did come in sequence and amusingly make a remarkable pairing. The first is from John. What is the earliest text you are aware of that has specific procedures for developing strong situations for Story Now? One. Couple of nuances after that. We'll get to those. And then Zach's questions. What are some of the best designs you've played or been a part of that really did step on up play well? What about those games do you think enabled good step on up play? Okay, these are almost exactly the same question. And I think that I can actually treat them jointly. John's phrasing, I think, sets the right framework, which is, as he puts it, and I'm going to critique this, that you have procedures, and then those land you with situations, and then the situations are identifiably good for Story Now as a purpose, or good for Step On Up as a purpose. All the critique. Oh my goodness. Okay, here it comes. And we'll get to that question about which texts, okay, in a bit. It's just that they're not going to answer the questions. Okay. The assumption here is that you have a design that enables a purpose. And one can arguably say, Ron, you said that in 1999. System does matter. Well, let's take a look at this. First of all, perfectly sound that procedures will generate situations. Not in kind of an automatic way. I mean, we have procedures, and then we have the components of a situation, especially in terms of what is known and not known, and especially in terms of what is stable and unstable. So that's fair. To clarify a bit, though, just in case, because there was actually a bit of nuance here, a little bit about an example of stalking dungeons in Tunnels and Trolls. Well, that's something that Game Master does. Don't think of that as the situation. It's not a situation until you have player characters in it. And since I'm talking about play, it doesn't matter whether they were pre-generated handouts. It doesn't matter whether there's anything else that you can think of as very transitive from one person to the rest of them when we're in play, which is when we start talking about situation. And different people have active authorities, however small, however big, about what, in each case, doesn't matter, but if they are genuine, then we have situation. Period. Whatever procedures get that into place are the procedures we're talking about. And therefore, we don't really have to worry about which procedures are better or worse. What really matters is that they work at all. Okay? So most of the problems we see with most role-playing designs is some sort of flaw at that level. Or if not a flaw, then assumptions that are being brought to it. Or if not assumptions that are being brought to it, responses during play that gum things up. So, okay. So if we're looking at procedures to situations, that's what I wanted to say about those. Now for how they relate to purpose. Both of these questions fall into, perhaps inadvertently, maybe the person would say that's not what I meant, but they really do fall into this idea that once you have that, then you can look at it and go, aha, that's a step on up-y kind of situation. Aha, that is a Story Now-y kind of situation. Let's hold on here just for a sec before we address what's valid about that, which is quite small. let's look at what's invalid about that, which is huge. Um, nothing, nothing, nothing will ever give the purpose of play to somebody. It can't. It can only activate or inspire it. Activating means, oh, wow, we can do that. And inspire means, well, I want to do this. Oh, look, that's a great way to do this. Those are possible, but it cannot be generated. You could, I mean, I'm a good example for certain kinds of things. Okay, let's take playing football. And I'm going to actually, okay, football meaning where I live, which is this round white ball which you kick about a field. Okay. All right, we've got one of those, and we've got a field. In fact, there is one right there. We even have people running around on that field, doing it, which happens too. And the people involved, they've got the time to do this, and they've got some procedures. And anybody who hopped in there would swiftly be apprised of whatever procedures they needed just to participate at all, and the further procedures would be, made clear as they went along. So all of those things. But look, you still got to have the inclination to do this at all, independently of those things' existence. I mean, I've been living here for 5 years, and that's been going on quite a lot, and I have no inclination. Does that mean I hate Step On Up or hate competition? No, there's lots of things I like to do that have those in there, but not that. I have no inclination. I don't care how good the procedures and the circumstances and the people and all the rest of it are. Now, if you do have the inclination, and then you encounter a specific instance, you can say whether that particular game or that particular set of equipment or those particular people or the way that they're doing it, the procedures that they're following are for you. And that's sort of the first notion is inclination. And so the next one we could call inspiration or enthusiasm. That when you see the way that it's being done in reality, in this case, that you actually are now not just inclined to do this at all, but are enthusiastic about doing it here and now. Hey guys, can I play? The relationship of purpose of play to the procedures has no other relationship. What I just described is the relationship. And I don't see, really importantly, I really, really think that losing sight of this is, I mean, I'll go ahead and say this is, I think, why Vincent stopped talking about this issue entirely. He just could not crack that particular, cliffside in people's minds, that, you punch the button and kaboom, we have story now, right? And he knew it was, a losing battle and people would talk themselves into circles forever. And he just bagged it. And I can see that, actually. If I didn't think it was a real thing, I would have bagged it too. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to just leave you hanging here. I think there's ways to address what you're asking about, but that must be kept in mind. I'll follow up just a little bit, okay? If we're talking about pedagogy, which is I guess there's sort of 3 levels, right? There's one where you yourself are looking at a text and you don't know how to do this and you're not sure what the purpose is and you're kind of flailing around. And the idea is, does this text orient you properly to say, oh, well, there is a purpose here, and oh, well, look, there are procedures for it, or there's procedures here, and you go, oh, doink, that matches this purpose for which I happen to have brought along an inclination. Oh, so how do you do this? Does the text have that in it? It might, or it might not. I actually don't think it's obliged to have that in there. Not in its sort of explicitly laid out from the start page by page thing. I do think the text has the responsibility not to lie. And that, frankly, is where I think the vast majority of role playing texts just belly flop, either through omission or commission, sometimes rather grievous commission. They effectively lie about that. So that is a problem. And if you're asking about what are the ones that don't lie about that, okay, we can deal. But remember, I don't think that a text has the responsibility to lay out the pedagogy from that starting point. These are things for practitioners and like a musical instrument, and I just don't think a musical instrument has the responsibility to teach itself. So that's one level. Another level is if you are yourself, inspired by this text, then how do you bring others into this? Now, then you have kind of a one step removed to the same problem. Now you feel as though you're the evangelist for this text, and now you have these, confused milling about people out there, and you're like, okay, brothers and sisters, come and, I shall show you the purpose of this thing. You know what? That's kind of a broken thing. You're no smarter or better than they are. If you could get turned on about this, then they can too, and the process really shouldn't be any different. So the idea that pedagogy has to be convincing them to do it, no, it's not going to work unless they are at least as inclined as you are in the first place. And just as with many of these other activities, you can get going on the procedures and somebody will, hit a brick wall and bounce out, very much as if I were to say, well, you know what, why don't I jump into that soccer game? 10 minutes into it, they're not going to like me being there, and I'm not going to like being there. I'm just not putting in what I need to put in, regardless of physical capability, because somebody who's not that physically capable, but they're into it, will actually be welcome in most circumstances. And especially if they're, they will be improving, but that's not going to happen if the inclination's not there. And even somebody who is physically reasonably capable and they just don't have the inclination to push into the procedures in a committed way, they're not welcome, and that's appropriate, okay? But that's how you find out most of the time. So I don't know. There's sort of this notion that the text is supposed to be able to provide these procedures, which will then be so they'll nail it. They'll teach everybody just how to do it. The purpose will blossom, and well, yeah, it can, but you have to have that inclination in the first place for everybody involved, or rather to say anybody who's going to stay. And second, you can't guarantee that the procedures in this particular text are going to be the right ones for that person, even with all the inclination in the world. I like those particular physical sports, and I don't like that particular physical sport. It's not football/soccer's fault. Notice, the immigrant situation. I keep switching the names, but okay. Now, okay, but all that stated, and that is not a small all that, okay? That's serious business. We are going to state that the procedures we have in hand do generate and can generate quite easily in play a situation of play, right? So in the most basic sense, we've got characters running around doing things and responsivity and all sorts of stuff, that can happen. Things we don't know, things that we do know but aren't certain about how they're going to turn out. A variety of things that are floating our boat about being there in those unstable or expressive circumstances. When that gets going, the purpose of play is already firing. So the real question is, can we actually identify anything about a situation which is specifically step on up-y. And a lot of people will say, aha, yes, there must be a goal. And then you go over to story now-y and everybody goes, oh, yes, aha, there must be a moral, or a ethical, crisis of some kind. Well, those are descriptively sort of true. But the fact is that you can, in any situation of inspiration, with inspiration present, you can find those. And you can make them. You can interpret things in such a way that those things are there. And so it's better not to look at the situation as fiction and better to look at the situation as procedure. Then, looking upon the situation and its procedures, how do we get to certainty from uncertainty? How do we get to stability, either of, more construction or less construction, to stability? I guess you could talk about entropy as a form of stability, right? Well, anyway, the point here is that now with those in hand, then we can go back to the fiction and go, oh, so that's what we think of as the monster. Oh, so that's what we think of. No, that is how we interpret the word monster. Which would be very, very, very different in those two different purposes of play. How do we interpret the term level? How do we interpret the term character? All of these things suddenly take on not just a story now kind of meaning versus a step on up kind of meaning, but they also take on a particular attention, an enthusiasm about the procedures in question. Does that mean that any situation is optimal for either purpose? That's an interesting question. Given different procedures and given the inclinations that have been, be stirred into enthusiasms among everybody present, or enough people present so that we can do this, maybe. I can look at a fictional situation in, say, mid-stage Tunnels and Trolls, 7th, 7th, 8th level, something like that, for the characters. And then I can go over to a situation in mid-stage early RuneQuest, which is to say, let's say, initiates, some of whom are, have been gifted with some rune magic, and the whole cultural context of what that means is present. We can look at those two situations, and in either case, they're fighting some, snake-bodied hottie, or confronting, let's say, some snake-bodied hottie. We are talking about my imagined situation. You got to live with this stuff. In some, crystal stalactite enclosure of some kind, they may look extremely similar on the basis of a lot of the fictional variables present. On the other hand, if we're looking at the procedures, then we see that many of the things I just say take on an extraordinarily different identity as active components of what we do, of decision making and operations in play. So does that mean that the situation is entirely labile to this? Probably not. I do think that through use, they get honed very clearly into appropriate forms for the purpose of play that's present. But looking at them on paper, you may be a little bit hard-pressed to say, well, this is a step-on-up situation. This is a story now situation. To go to texts, I always like to turn people toward The Haunted Ruins, written by Greg Stafford, a early-ish stage RuneQuest scenario. I actually have the Avalon Hill reprint, which, by author's statement to me, is wonderfully suited, and upon reading, I agree, wonderfully suited to, shall we say, cultural contact, and fraught with not just cultural potential sources of conflict, but also personal, historical. The more rich your characters have become or will become through play, the more rich the interactions with the material can become in terms that would be very familiar to anybody who likes playing Sorcerer, Circle of Hands, Trollbabe, etc. Whereas another person looking at it could easily and a group actually employing it could very easily be taking those variables in a completely different purpose. I know where my inclinations lie, so for a game of this kind, so therefore I have a hard time repurposing or purposing the Haunted Ruins into a step-on-up context. But you know what? I know it can be done. I know a person can look at that and go, and it would start looking a lot more like a particularly complex and nuanced and tricky version of an 8th level adventure in Tunnels and Trolls. If that's what they're doing with it. Now, of course, person X looks at that and says, that's awful. How could you do that? And then person Y over there, looking back, looking what they're doing and saying, what are you pansies doing over there? That's ridiculous. So do I think that the different texts do stronger jobs toward particular inspiring and providing materials toward particular purposes? I do. But again, the texts are just texts. Purposes of play, once enthused, are very powerful.